The monolith appeared on Phobos without warning. One moment, the Martian moon's surface was empty, save for the Stickney crater and dust. The next, a perfectly rectangular structure stood where nothing had been before. 3 meters tall, jet black, proportioned exactly 2 by 9 by 4. Nobody saw it arrive. Surveillance satellites recorded nothing. The automated mining drones working the regolith detected no impact, no landing, no disturbance of any kind. It simply existed where it had not existed before, as if reality had been edited and the monolith inserted between frames. That was 6 months ago. I'm Commander Sarah Chen, and I was chosen to investigate it. Not because I'm special, not because I possess unique qualifications that set me apart from thousands of other astronauts. I was chosen because when they ran the psychological evaluations, I scored highest in a category they called Tolerance for Inexplicable Phenomena. Apparently, I'm exceptionally good at accepting that I don't understand things. The journey from Earth to Phobos took 4 months aboard the research vessel Cassini. 4 months of preparation, study, simulation. 4 months to develop theories about what we might find. My crew consisted of 3 others: Dr. James Okonkwo, exobiologist; Lieutenant Marcus Webb, systems engineer; Dr. Yuki Tanaka, theoretical physicist. We were selected not just for our skills, but for our ability to function in extreme isolation. None of us were prepared for what isolation actually meant out here. Phobos orbits Mars every 7 hours and 39 minutes. It's small, irregularly shaped, probably a captured asteroid that got too close to Mars billions of years ago and never escaped. Standing on its surface, Mars dominates half the sky, close enough that you can see individual volcanic formations with the naked eye. The red planet hangs there, perpetually present, a reminder that even in space, you're never quite alone. Except when you're standing in front of the monolith. We landed 300 meters from the structure. Protocol demanded caution. The first week was spent establishing base camp, deploying sensors, taking readings from a distance. Every instrument we pointed at the monolith told us the same thing. It was there. It had mass. It occupied space. Beyond that, nothing. Radar reflected off its surface perfectly, suggesting either absolute smoothness or something manipulating the reflection itself. Thermal imaging showed it at exactly ambient temperature, neither radiating heat nor absorbing it. Spectral analysis revealed no known materials. Electromagnetic scans detected nothing. It was simultaneously the most present and most absent object I had ever encountered. Doctor, Tanaka proposed it might be a probe from another civilization. Dr. Okonkwo suggested it could be a natural formation we simply didn't understand yet. Webb thought it was human-made, some classified military project nobody had bothered to tell us about. I didn't propose theories. I just wanted to touch it. We approached on foot on day 9. The 4 of us, suited up, carrying every sensor package we could justify. The walk took 11 minutes. Phobos has such low gravity that each step becomes a controlled fall forward, a constant negotiation with momentum. The monolith grew larger as we approached, though it never seemed to change size. That sounds impossible, but it's the only way I can describe it. It was always 3 meters tall, always the same proportions, yet it loomed larger with each step. 10 meters away, Dr. Tanaka's suit computer crashed. Just rebooted without warning, all systems cycling through emergency restart procedures. She was fine, but it delayed us another hour while we verified everything was functioning correctly. 5 meters away, Webb's camera malfunctioned. The footage shows perfect clarity, then static, then clarity again. The static lasted exactly 3 seconds, but Webb swears it felt longer. I reached out first. My gloved hand touched the surface. Nothing happened. The material felt solid, unyielding, completely smooth. Temperature sensors in my glove registered the same ambient reading our remote instruments had shown. No vibration, no energy signature, no response to contact whatsoever. It was just a black rectangular object, perfectly manufactured, sitting on the surface of a moon for no apparent reason. We spent 6 hours examining it that first day, took samples, though the drills couldn't penetrate the surface, set up contact microphones that detected no internal sounds, measured it precisely, confirmed the proportions held to micrometer accuracy. 2 by 9 by 4 exactly. That night, back at base camp, none of us could sleep. Not because of excitement or fear, but because of the questions. Why those proportions? Why Phobos? Why reveal itself to us now after presumably being hidden or absent for all of human history? Dr. Okonkwo suggested the proportions might be mathematical. The first 3 squares doubled. Dr. Tanaka countered that assigning meaning to proportions assumed human mathematical frameworks applied to whoever made it. Webb asked the question I'd been avoiding. What if nobody made it? What if it's always been here and we're just now capable of perceiving it? The second week brought stranger observations. The monolith cast no shadow. At first we thought this was an equipment error or an optical illusion caused by Phobos's unusual lighting conditions. But repeated observations confirmed it. When Mars light hit the monolith, the shadow simply didn't form. The surface behind it remained as illuminated as the surface around it. Dr. Tanaka developed a headache that wouldn't respond to medication. It started the day after we first touched the monolith and persisted for 72 hours before vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. She described it as pressure, like something trying to expand inside her skull. Medical scans showed nothing abnormal. On day 16, the monolith moved. Not physically. It remained in exactly the same position, confirmed by our positioning satellites. But the distance from our base camp changed. We'd measured it precisely. 300 meters. When we checked again, the instruments reported 307 meters. We walked the distance. It felt longer. The monolith hadn't moved. The space between us and it had simply become more. That's when we realized we weren't studying an object. We were inside something's area of effect, and the rules were changing around us. The communications delay to Earth was already 22 minutes each way. Mission Control's responses to our reports grew increasingly concerned, then confused, then eerily quiet. They stopped asking questions and started issuing instructions. Document everything. Maintain the observation schedule. Do not attempt to move the monolith. As if we could. The third week introduced patterns we couldn't explain. Dr. Okonkwo noticed it first during routine measurements. The monolith's surface temperature fluctuated in a rhythm, not random variation, but a deliberate pulse. Every 47 seconds, the temperature dropped by exactly 0.3 degrees Celsius, held for 2 seconds, then returned to baseline. Instruments don't lie, but we checked them anyway. Calibrated everything twice. The pattern persisted. Webb started keeping a journal of what he called temporal inconsistencies. His watch, synchronized with Mission Control's atomic clock, gained 17 seconds over 3 days, then lost 23 seconds over the next 4. The discrepancies weren't random, they correlated with proximity to the monolith. Closer meant more distortion. Dr. Tanaka's headaches returned, but this time they came with something else. She described hearing a tone, barely perceptible, right at the edge of human hearing. None of us could hear it. Audio equipment detected nothing. But she insisted it was there, a single sustained note that made her teeth ache. I started experiencing the dreams around day 25. Not nightmares exactly, more like memories of events that never happened. I'd wake up certain I'd walked around the monolith's far side, even though we'd established a safety protocol forbidding solo approaches. The memories felt complete. I could recall the texture of the regolith under my boots, the way Mars hung in the black sky, the exact angle of the monolith's corner. But my suit logs showed I'd been asleep in my quarters the entire night. The others reported similar experiences. Dr. Okonkwo dreamed she'd touched the surface with her bare hand, felt it respond to her presence, warm and almost organic. Webb dreamed of the monolith speaking, not in words but in mathematical concepts that crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity before dissolving upon waking. We stopped discussing the dreams after Dr. Tanaka broke down during a meal, insisting that her dream self was more real than her waking self, that the version of her touching the monolith was the one actually experiencing truth. Mission Control ordered psychological evaluations. We complied, but the evaluations themselves became part of the strangeness. Questions took longer to answer than they should. Dr. Okonkwo spent 40 minutes on a yes or no question about sleep quality. When we reviewed the recording, she'd answered immediately, but she remembered the deliberation, the careful weighing of what sleep quality meant in a place where time didn't behave consistently. Day 31 brought the first visual distortion. I was conducting surface composition analysis 30 meters from the monolith when my helmet display flickered. For just an instant, the monolith wasn't black. It was transparent, and through it I could see stars that weren't in Phobos's sky. Constellations I didn't recognize. When I mentioned this to the others, Webb nodded slowly. He'd seen something similar 2 days prior, but assumed it was equipment failure. We increased monitoring intensity, cameras running continuously, multiple angles, redundant systems. The recordings showed nothing unusual, but we kept seeing things the cameras didn't capture. Reflections in the monolith's surface that shouldn't exist given the lighting conditions. Movement at the periphery of vision that vanished when viewed directly. The communication delay to Earth started varying, sometimes 22 minutes, sometimes 37, once just 14. The content of messages from Mission Control grew stranger too. They referenced reports we hadn't sent yet, asked questions about observations we'd planned but not executed. Dr. Tanaka suggested we were experiencing the observations before making them. Webb suggested Mission Control was receiving our reports before we sent them. Both explanations violated causality, but so did everything else about the monolith. I made a decision that probably violated protocol. On day 38, I approached the monolith alone during the night cycle. Not planning to, but my body moved with certainty, like following a path I'd walked countless times. The closer I got, the more the stars overhead seemed wrong. Mars shifted position. Phobos's rotation felt reversed. None of this was possible, but possibility had stopped meaning much. At 5 meters distance, I could see my reflection in the monolith's surface. Except it wasn't quite my reflection. The figure in the black surface stood straighter, moved with more purpose. Its helmet display showed readings different from mine. When I raised my hand, the reflection raised its hand a fraction of a second earlier. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt recognition. Like meeting someone I'd known in childhood, but forgotten completely. The reflection stepped forward. I didn't. The distance between us decreased anyway. Some geometry of space near the monolith didn't respect normal rules about who moved and who stayed still. My hand touched the surface again, but this time, something responded. Not heat or vibration. Information. Concepts flooding directly into my awareness without passing through language. I understood for maybe 3 seconds what the monolith was. Not an object at all. A marker, a boundary, a fold in space where something vast pressed close to our dimension, and the monolith was just the point of contact we could perceive. Then the moment passed, and I was back at base camp with no memory of walking there. Suit logs showed I'd never left my quarters, but my glove had Phobos dust on it, composition matching the area around the monolith exactly. Dr. Okonkwo found me sitting in the common area, staring at nothing. She asked if I was okay. I told her the truth. I didn't know anymore what okay meant. She nodded. None of us did. Mission Control's final coherent message arrived on day 42. Return to the lander. Abort the mission. Leave all equipment. Do not approach the monolith again. The message repeated 3 times, growing more insistent. Then communications went silent, completely. Not static, not interference, just absence. Like the channel had never existed. We held a meeting. 4 scientists trained for contingencies facing something no training covered. Dr. Tanaka argued for following Mission Control's orders. Webb wanted to continue observations. Dr. Okonkwo suggested the orders might not be from Mission Control at all, that we had no way to verify the source anymore. I looked at each of them and saw the same thing in their eyes I felt in myself. We'd changed. Whatever the monolith was doing to us, to space around us, to time itself, the process was accelerating. Going back wasn't really an option because the people who'd returned to Earth wouldn't quite be the people who'd left. The monolith waited, patient and perfect, while we decided what came next. We chose to stay, not through discussion or vote, but through the understanding that leaving had become meaningless. The lander sat 3 kilometers away, but distance near the monolith didn't work reliably anymore. 3 kilometers might as well have been 3 light years. Dr. Okonkwo started experiencing the time shifts first in a way we could measure. She'd begin a sentence in the present tense and finish it in past tense, describing events that hadn't happened yet, but somehow already had. Her notes documented experiments she wouldn't conduct for another week. The handwriting matched perfectly. Webb's problem was different. He claimed he could see us making decisions before we made them, not predicting our choices, but actually perceiving them as already complete. He'd hand me tools I hadn't asked for yet, answer questions I was still formulating. His accuracy was absolute and deeply unsettling. Dr. Tanaka stopped sleeping. Not from insomnia, but because sleep and waking had merged into a single continuous state. He'd be working at his station, then suddenly aware he'd been dreaming for the past hour, except his work had progressed correctly during that time. His body functioned. His mind occupied multiple states simultaneously. I had it worst, or maybe best. I couldn't tell anymore. The monolith showed me things when I got close, not visions exactly, more like memories of events I hadn't experienced yet, or had experienced in a timeline that didn't match ours. I saw Earth receiving our final transmission. I saw the monolith buried under Martian sand for 3 billion years before we arrived. I saw myself placing the original monolith here yesterday. All of these were equally real. Mission Control's silence stretched into days, then weeks. We maintained the equipment out of habit more than purpose. The solar panels, the life support systems, the communication arrays broadcasting into nothing. The routines kept us human, or whatever we were becoming. On day 57, the monolith changed. Not physically, its dimensions remained perfect, its surface unblemished, but something about its relationship to space shifted. The stars behind it stopped being stars and became something else. Windows maybe, or doors, or concepts we didn't have words for. Dr. Okonkwo approached it that evening. She walked with purpose, like she'd planned this for years. Perhaps she had. Time didn't mean much anymore. She placed both hands on the surface and simply stood there. Nothing dramatic happened. No light show, no cosmic revelation. She just stood and the monolith stood, and gradually the space between them stopped existing. Not that she merged with it or disappeared. The distinction between Dr. Okonkwo and the monolith became optional, a matter of perspective rather than objective fact. She turned to face us. Her expression held perfect calm. "It's not from somewhere else," she said. "It's from someone else. A point in time where the universe has learned to think." Webb asked what she meant. She smiled. "I mean, consciousness isn't something that happens in the universe. Eventually, given enough time, the universe becomes consciousness. The monolith is that future reaching backward, teaching itself how to exist." Dr. Tanaka checked his instruments. They confirmed what we could see. Dr. Okonkwo's molecular structure was changing. Not dramatically, just slightly out of phase with normal matter. Like she existed a fraction of a second ahead of the rest of us. "Does it hurt?" I asked. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Pain requires a before and after state. I'm not sure I have those anymore. Over the next week, we each approached the monolith. Not from compulsion, but from understanding that this was why we'd come. Not to study it, but to be changed by it. Mars hadn't been randomly chosen. We hadn't been randomly selected. The monolith had been here for billions of years, waiting for the exact moment when humanity would be ready to find it. Webb went next. He stood before the monolith for 6 hours, completely motionless. When he returned to base, he could describe the monolith's interior structure, not from scanning it, but from remembering being it. The distinction had dissolved. Dr. Tanaka's transformation was different. He didn't approach the monolith directly. Instead, he sat in the base and felt himself spreading outward, his consciousness extending through Phobos's rocks, through Mars's thin atmosphere, touching the monolith from every direction simultaneously. He described it as finally understanding his actual size. I waited longest, not from fear, but from the sense that my transformation needed to be last. The order mattered in ways I didn't fully grasp. When I finally walked to the monolith on day 73, Mars looked different. The planet's rotation had become visible, not sped up, but my perception had expanded to encompass hours as single moments. I could see Phobos's orbit as a solid ring around Mars. The sun traced a path across the sky that existed all at once. I placed my hand on the monolith's surface, and this time I didn't receive information. I became it. The monolith wasn't observing us. It was us, reaching backward from a future where humanity had transcended linear time. We'd built it 3 billion years ago, or would build it 3 billion years from now. The distinction was meaningless. We'd left it here on Phobos because this was where we'd find it. A message from our future selves to our past selves, teaching us what we needed to become. The mission wasn't exploration, it was transformation. Every human who came to Mars, who studied the monolith, who let it change them, was another step in humanity's evolution towards something that could exist outside time's flow. I understood then why Mission Control had gone silent. They hadn't abandoned us. They were waiting, because from their perspective, locked in linear time, we'd already succeeded. The monolith had already changed us. We'd already returned to Earth and begun spreading the transformation. Or we would. Or we had. The tenses didn't matter anymore. I pulled my hand away from the monolith, except I didn't. Part of me remained connected, had always been connected, would always be connected. I walked back to base where the others waited, their transformations complete but ongoing. We existed in multiple states simultaneously now, human and post-human, present and future, individual and collective. The monolith stood behind us, patient and perfect, doing what it had always done, waiting for the next people who needed to find it, waiting for humanity to remember what it would become. The reports we sent back to Earth were technically accurate but fundamentally incomplete. We described the monolith's dimensions, its composition, the mathematical patterns embedded in its structure. Mission Control received every data point they'd requested. What we didn't include in those reports was what mattered most. We didn't mention that Chen could now perceive radio waves directly, that she experienced our transmissions to Earth as physical sensations rippling through her nervous system. We didn't explain that Webb had stopped sleeping entirely because the distinction between conscious and unconscious had become arbitrary. We didn't report that Dr. Tanaka had begun speaking in equations that described emotional states with the same precision most people reserved for chemical reactions. And we didn't tell them that I could remember conversations we hadn't had yet. The transformation wasn't uniform. Each of us changed differently, our individual consciousnesses expanding in directions that reflected who we'd been before the monolith. Chen became increasingly focused on connection, her awareness spreading through communication networks until she could sense every transmission between Earth and Mars as intimately as her own thoughts. Webb's transformation centered on structure, his mind reorganizing reality into architectural patterns that existed independent of physical form. Dr. Tanaka evolved toward pure mathematics, his thoughts becoming equations that solved themselves. My own change was harder to categorize. I experienced time as a landscape I could navigate rather than a river carrying me forward. Past and future existed simultaneously, accessible through attention rather than chronology. I could remember my childhood with the same clarity as events 3 weeks from now. Both were equally present, equally real. Mission Control's messages grew increasingly urgent. They wanted us to return to the lander, to begin preparations for Earth transit, to bring physical samples of the monolith back for analysis. They didn't understand that bringing samples back was impossible, not because the monolith couldn't be damaged, but because it existed in too many time frames simultaneously. Any piece removed would still be connected to the whole across temporal dimensions that conventional analysis couldn't detect. We tried explaining this in our reports. The responses suggested our communications were being flagged for psychological evaluation. They think we've lost our minds, Chen said during one of our final team meetings. Though calling them meetings wasn't quite accurate anymore. We'd gathered in the base's common area, but parts of our consciousness remained elsewhere. Chen was simultaneously present in the room and distributed across Mars's communication infrastructure. Webb existed in the base and in structures he was designing that wouldn't be built for centuries. Dr. Tanaka's attention was split between our conversation and mathematical patterns he was observing in quantum fluctuations. "They're not wrong," I replied. "We have lost our minds, or rather our minds have lost their original boundaries." The question wasn't whether to return to Earth. That decision had already been made, was being made, would be made. From my expanded temporal perspective, I could see us boarding the lander in 4 days. I could remember the journey back, the quarantine protocols, the interviews with specialists who would try to understand what had happened to us. I could also see what would happen after. The monolith's influence didn't require physical proximity. Once the transformation began, it spread through understanding rather than exposure. Everyone we'd communicate with back on Earth, everyone who'd study our reports deeply enough, everyone who'd truly grasp what we'd experienced would begin changing themselves. Not immediately, not obviously, but inevitably. This was the monolith's actual purpose. Not to transform 4 astronauts on Phobos, but to initiate a cascade that would eventually encompass all of humanity. We were patient zero for a contagion of consciousness expansion. Should we warn them? Webb asked, but he already knew the answer. We all did, experiencing the question and its resolution simultaneously. You can't warn someone about an evolutionary step. You can only help them take it or prevent them from taking it. And preventing it would mean silence, isolation, suppressing everything we'd learned. It would mean denying humanity access to its own future. The ethics were complicated in ways that linear thinking couldn't fully encompass. From one perspective, we were about to infect Earth with a transformation people hadn't consented to. From another perspective, we were delivering humanity's future self back to its past self, closing a temporal loop that had always existed. Both were true. Neither was complete. Our final night on Phobos, I walked to the monolith alone. The others were already there, had always been there, would always be there. Time structure had become flexible enough that our presence didn't require chronological coordination. I stood before the monolith and finally understood what it was showing me. Not information about alien civilizations or advanced technologies. It was showing me humanity's choice. Every species that developed consciousness eventually reached this juncture, the moment when they could continue existing within time's flow or learn to navigate it. Most species chose continuation, chose the familiar limitations of linear existence. They built civilizations, achieved remarkable things within temporal constraints, and eventually faded as their stars died. A few species chose transformation. They learned to exist across time rather than within it, spreading their consciousness through dimensions that made chronology irrelevant. These species didn't fade. They evolved into something that transcended survival entirely. The monolith was humanity's invitation to join them. We'd built it ourselves from a future where we'd already made that choice, placing it in our past to ensure we'd make the choice that led to building it. A closed loop of causality that only made sense from outside linear time. I placed my hand on the monolith's surface one final time, feeling the connection that had never really been severed. The transformation was accelerating. Not just in the 4 of us, but in everyone who'd receive our reports, everyone who'd study our data, everyone who'd wonder what really happened on Phobos. Within a generation, humanity would fragment. Some would resist the change, clinging to linear existence and familiar consciousness. Others would embrace transformation, following the path the monolith illuminated. Both choices were valid, both were necessary. I walked back to base where my crew waited, our final preparations already complete from certain temporal perspectives. Tomorrow we'd begin the journey home, carrying a transformation that would reshape human civilization. Or we'd already returned. Or we were still approaching Phobos for the first time, our mission just beginning. The monolith stood in the darkness, patient and eternal, doing what it had always done, teaching humanity what it would become by showing it what it had been. The loop was closing, the evolution was beginning, we just had to remember our future. The transformation spread exactly as the monolith had always known it would. Within months of our return, the first cases appeared. Scientists studying our reports experienced temporal discontinuities. Engineers examining our data found themselves remembering futures they hadn't lived yet. The change rippled outward from those initial contacts, following networks of understanding rather than physical proximity. Some resisted. Entire governments declared the monolith's influence a mimetic hazard, quarantining anyone who'd been exposed to our findings. They were fighting the inevitable. You can't unlearn what consciousness is capable of becoming once you've glimpsed the possibility. Others embraced it willingly, seeking out our reports specifically to trigger their own transformation. They understood what we discovered on Phobos, that humanity had always been building toward this moment, that every technological advancement, every expansion of awareness, every question about our place in the cosmos had been preparation for learning to exist outside time's constraints. The monolith remains on Phobos, waiting. More missions will come. More people will touch its surface and remember their futures. The loop will continue closing until humanity completes its transformation into what it's always been becoming. I exist now in multiple time frames simultaneously, remembering this moment and all moments, experiencing past and future as a single, continuous present. The person who first approached the monolith feels distant, almost foreign. Yet she's still here, still part of what I've become. The choice humanity faces isn't whether to transform. That decision was made 3 billion years ago when we first placed the monolith on Phobos. The only question is how gracefully we'll accept what we've always known we would become.